Cool. Just to ask, I would like to record my speech so that I can send it to my coach. So that would mean that if an opt team is giving me a POI, that would also then make it into the recording. It would only be the POI. Just want to check that opt teams are okay with that. Yeah, I have thumbs up from OO, CO. Cool. Okay, amazing. Give me 2 seconds and I'll get started. Panel, the worst treatment that the people that you are trying to help with this policy feel does not happen on a university campus. It happens out in the world where you don't have the same protections of a code of conduct or a disciplinary procedure. We think that you make those harms worse without helping the people that you are trying to protect on university campuses. For that reason, so proud to stand in opening government. Three things in this speech. First of all, framing about how we think this looks like. Second of all, why this discourages conversation. Third of all, why this worsens treatment of minorities elsewhere. Firstly, the framing. Note that minorities on university campuses often don't need the safe spaces that you're trying to create for them. Why is it the case? Firstly, friend groups. They often self-select into their own groups that they feel safe with. They go to the same places. They spend time with like the queer or minority communities that they are a part of, and therefore don't feel the need to like go to a place where only certain words can be said or treatment has to happen in a particular way. Second, other societies often exist. Be those like literally like the LGBT society on your campus, or like the Jewish society or African societies that most university campuses will have. It's also that like a lot of like the debating society will have members of specific minority groups that you feel comfortable interacting with. Oftentimes those people like know the language that you feel comfortable using, know what triggers you in relation to discussions about like those kinds of things, understand your needs as like an individual better because you are friends with them, you feel comfortable communicating to them about those things, and therefore are often actually able to provide you the safe, the kind of safe space that opposition say these people need with it like in the correct way. Comparatively, what we think these safe like official safe spaces and safetyism policies done are often done badly. Why? Because staff on university campuses often aren't a part of the communities that they are trying to legislate for. It's virtually impossible for every single minority community to have one person on the board or group of people representing them making these kinds of decisions. And opposition will try to tell you, but they have an incentive to listen to these communities. Yes, but they also have so much on their workload in terms of the running of like a tens of thousands of population student campus, while also trying to incorporate all these kinds of things. That means that the decisions that happen in relation to these safe spaces happen at best over the course of like one meeting, if not the course of a few emails. And so it is virtually impossible for you to consistently provide for the needs of all of the students, all of the diverse minority groups that have various needs from this. That means that oftentimes these measures are like patronizing or aren't the measures they need. So rather than like, for example, providing separate bathrooms, which is costly and time consuming, you just say like, certain people aren't allowed to use these words, or like, we see you and we believe you. Secondly, oftentimes it's done like in a very public, like for publicity, right? So it's seen in like constantly in college advertising things about how accepting they are or how zero tolerance they have for things like discriminatory language or behavior. I think that oftentimes these things don't provide the help you need for these people. But beyond that, moving on to my first point, they discourage conversation. How? Because people feel unsure or silenced and when they feel like they can't ask questions. Because note, the very public nature of this that's being done, saying we fight homophobia or we fight this or we have zero tolerance for these kinds of things and this university campus is a safe space, oftentimes people don't know what that means. And so when they hear zero tolerance, they just mean this is potentially really damaging for my ability to study at this campus or my ability to avoid disciplinary proceedings. And therefore, it's probably probably don't feel comfortable asking questions about those kinds of things or having specific conversations that might be uncomfortable. But secondly, people within those safe spaces, the people that are part of those kinds of groups, feel their opinion is right, or at least don't have their opinion challenged to the point that they ever feel the need to change it or feel the need to actually have conversations on those issues, because they're constantly told like, you are right, like we see you, we affirm you. What that means is that there is less education on these kinds of issues. So those are things like asking people about their experiences, like how they knew they were trans or how they knew they were gay, because that might be seen as like some kind of offensive question if it's like, in the way that it's phrased, or asking seemingly offensive questions, right? So like oftentimes there are behaviors that you associate with specific groups that you might not want to like bring up or ask about, even though those might be productive conversations to have about your understanding of specific minority groups. So like, for example, like why gay people talk like that or why they do specific things. It's not necessarily that those things are offensive in nature. It's that if you are worried they might might be, and you know the university campus has a zero tolerance policy, you are never going to have those conversations in the first place. The impact of that is that people understand each other worse, which means that they are more likely to say offensive things in the long term because you simply don't have the same understanding of those people. It means that rather than asking about certain people's behaviors, you just attribute behaviors to them. So rather than saying, why do X group of people do Y thing, you just say X group of people do Y thing, and you continue with those stereotypes throughout your life because you never learn to actually like understand them or dismantle them. But also it makes it more likely that you get education elsewhere, like YouTube or TikTok, that like often is full of inaccuracies or often is full of people trying to mislead you, and therefore are far more likely to get a misleading education and therefore say things, say worse things. Before I go on to my second point, anything from closing?
Isn't a friend group also a sort of safe space on a university campus? If so, why shouldn't we expand this to more people?
Wait, say that again?
Isn't a queer friend group also sort of safe space? If so, shouldn't we be
Oh,
expanding this
yeah,
to a
yeah,
large
yeah.
number of
But,
people?
but but the thing is, most people have friends, or at least student societies are very, very accessible to people, and you are able to make friends through them. What I'm saying is that oftentimes friend groups or smaller spaces are often a lot better able to cater to the individual needs of each person, as opposed to an aggregate safe space that often does it poorly because it can't aggregate the needs of everybody. So it actually does, like, yes, you can make it bigger if you want, but when you make it bigger, it specifically stops helping people. Why do they get worse treatment elsewhere? Because there's more radicalization. Because currently, radicals try to push this narrative of being silenced in order to further their cause. They call themselves the silent majority all the time when they call for things that are actually just like oftentimes racist or xenophobic. Oftentimes people reject this as a conspiracy because they're not being silenced. However, now it's just more proof that they can point to say like, no, here is the literal evidence that all the things that we're trying to say, the government is trying to stop you from listening to, or they're trying to stop these conversations from happening. This means that people are just more likely to be radicalized because they have that initial belief into the system that they are trying to radicalize you into. It's less easy for you to just outright reject it, and you're more likely to listen to them, and that just makes it more likely that more people go down that path. And we know how easy it is because we see it all the time in like news where there are studies done on how easy it is for you to be radicalized through algorithms like TikTok or YouTube or chat rooms like 4chan, because people feel affirmed, they feel welcome, and now uniquely from their college campuses, they feel welcome to speak, welcome to ask questions, but the answers that they are being given to those questions are oftentimes making them more radical, pushing them further and further in hatred and distrust of those communities. And the impact of that is that you're just more likely to have radical people. These are the people that take the actions that are the most harmful to these minorities, that say slurs, that use violence, that say horrible things or try to deny them their rights. But it's like queer people being assaulted on nights out or police being called on racial minorities. Like, these are the people that are doing the most harmful things to these minority communities. And we think there's more likely to happen on their side of the house when you make more people likely to be radicals. For that reason, so proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech, calling leader of opposition.
Okay, am I visible and audible?
Yes to both.
Okay, just as a trigger warning for my speech, it will contain discussions of rape or potentially very traumatic experiences that people have had. I think that's kind of par for the course of this debate, but worth mentioning. All right, start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think it's quite telling that I feel the need to give that trigger warning before my speech. And the reason for that is because this is just a fucking good idea for communication and making sure people have a good time at university. We're going to run 3 cases out of opening opposition. Firstly, on why it improves free speech and learning at universities. Secondly, why safe spaces are incredibly important for people's well-being and having a good time at university. And thirdly, why trigger words are also incredibly important and prevent awful harms people that just ruin their time. But before that, I'm going to give 2 points of rebuttal to OG. The first thing OG says is that minority groups don't need this because they're able to find community anyway. 2 responses to this. Firstly, I think they often do still need this insofar as they have to interact with other students and can't spend their whole time in the society, right? So I need to have a class with people who have different political views to me and these sorts of things. So I still interact with the general student populace who might have different views and I might not be in the group that they're talking talking about. Secondly, I think it's often very hard to find community anyway for two reasons. Firstly, people don't walk around with a badge saying, hey, I'm gay, by the way, so that you can go and find them easily. What safe spaces provide is an easy way to like go and find these people, to find people who can support you. But secondly, we think in the most important cases in this debate, namely where the university culture isn't very like progressive and supportive of these groups, it's especially hard to find community then because there probably won't be an LGBTQ plus society because the university and the people who are gay in that university don't want to be in one since it puts a target on their back. The second thing they say is that universities won't do this well. I think there's two things to say here. Firstly, yes, university staff are busy, but they will get very, very bad headlines if they have the kind of horrible like PR failures and events where like there's something horrible that happens to a gay student or a black student on their campus. Therefore, because this is important for one, there's students applying there who like otherwise won't feel safe and they'll think, oh, that's that dodgy uni that had the PR scandal. And because it's bad for their funders who alumni won't want to give them money back, we think they're likely to prioritize this over other needs of the university. The second thing to say here is just that the students often run these services as well. Like we have student equity officers at the debate tournaments and stuff, guys. Same things happens at student unions, so they're often able to help out as well. What do we think university is about in opening opposition? We think it's two things. We think it's firstly about learning and being able to participate in conversations and get a diversity of views. And secondly, it's about actually having an enjoyable experience you can come out from and actually look back and think how great your time was. First argument then, why does this improve freedom of speech and learning at universities? I think the framing here is that given one of the most important purposes of university is to freely explore ideas and develop intellectually, we need to be able to create a space where people are able to do that. Gov wants to claim that like it's important to expose people to ideas that we don't have these measures, but we actually think the opposite is true. Why? It's because in order to have freedom of speech and in order to explore ideas properly, we need to have certain limitations upon it. This may sound initially counterintuitive, but we do this all the time to have productive discussions, right? In our parliaments, we limit the amount of time that opposition parties are about to speak. If I go over 7:15 in this speech, you're going to tell me to shut up, Chair. That's despite the fact that we're trying to have a productive conversation here. And therefore, I think that when you're going after the truth, we often put like reasonable restraints on freedom of speech to enable more productive discourse. What specifically are we talking about here? We think it's really important for two reasons. Firstly, it means that people feel safe to participate in the conversation in the first place. I cannot freely engage in discourse and hear these different ideas and such if I'm sitting there feeling anxious, I'm overwhelmed about things that are being said, or if I'm worried about things that are going to be said and therefore can't concentrate. I'm not able to participate in that discussion. But secondly, if the university culture is so shit to me that I'm living my life miserably, that I'm anxious and depressed, then I'm also probably not able to do my work well. I'm not able to focus on my degree because I'm very, very unhappy in the university. How do we fix this for students? 4 ways. Firstly, safe spaces. This just looks like having a place for people to leave the conversation if it becomes overwhelming. Recently at the Oxford Union, we had Kathleen Stock, who has like very controversial views about trans people, right? But we provided safe spaces, which meant students who felt uncomfortable were then able to leave that conversation and go to somewhere with someone who had support. This meant that trans students who otherwise wouldn't have come to that event do end up coming to it because they know they'll have the support they need if things go badly then. Second, we have trigger words. Now you're not sitting there worried that someone's about to say something horrible because there's a general culture and expectation that you warn people if you're going to say these kinds of things. That means people are able to protect themselves and therefore they're more likely to go to events and discuss these ideas. Thirdly, we think we give them more university welfare staff. If you have staff who are like trained to help you, this means that you're likely to then get like generally like people who like are able to help you in these kind of scenarios and generally make you feel more safe and able to go and participate in these conversations because you know you'll have the support if you like need it. The impact of this is just that you can better pursue your intellectual learning, and students from minority backgrounds or vulnerable groups are actually able to come to these conversations because they know they'll have the support they need if they and the ability to opt out if they no longer want to be in this conversation. The alternative panel is just that you don't opt into these conversations at all. Note that this flips the OG case because now on their side, gay people and trans people just don't come to the conversation, which means you never hear these progressive views, you never hear their experience, and therefore you're likely to be completely ignorant about it after university. So we think it's better for learning at universities. Second argument then, flipping the order for my structure so that it's not unclear, is on trigger words and why they prevent awful harms to make university more enjoyable. I want to characterize how triggering subjects work and how triggers typically develop. If you have a trigger about a topic, it's probably because you've had a horrific experience, which hearing that word, just hearing it can call you back to and or like discussion of that topic can call you back to and make you think of it and feel the same fear that you did there. It's essentially a minor form of PTSD or in some forms full PTSD, right? Realistically, panel, this looks like instances of students who have been raped, who have been sexually assaulted, who have faced horrible misogyny or racism against them throughout their life. They've had a horrible, abuse of the police who have attacked them, and they have this traumatizing experience as a result. When this topic comes up, then, in conversation in classes or in talks or whatever, and they're not expecting it, it can trigger significant anxiety and call back to that because now the student feels unsafe. Before I continue, disclosing of a POI.
Yeah, but in most cases, this is not going to be this. This is going to be a femme presenting non-binary person and somebody using she, her pronouns on them. In these situations, it's better to get desensitized to these things.
It's better to get desensitized. We think that we want those sorts of people to be able to participate in conversations, and they won't if people are saying blatantly offensive shit. Okay. The impact of this argument is just that people who have had horrible experiences now don't have them on our side. This is just a massive win. They don't have this terrible and horrible experience where they're going to feel fear and anxiety. Third argument, why our safe space is really important. We think that's for 3 reasons in just improving your quality of experience at university. Firstly, we think members of minority groups are now able to have groups they can participate in. So if they can't participate in the main conversation, they can still go and participate in a safe space conversation, and therefore can enjoy that and have interesting discussions there. Secondly, we improve the university culture to make students enjoy their experiences. When these policies are in place, we think students are actually likely to learn of the importance of making people feel included. It makes the university culture feel more welcoming. Note that students are likely to be accepting of this, contrary to what OG say, because firstly, students tend to be progressive and left-wing when they're younger, and secondly, they tend to be more open to ideas, so they're likely to take this on, especially when it's coming to the university who is a figure of authority. And thirdly, we think minority students now just have a support group they can go back to if they are triggered. They know where these people are, they can go and find them for support. We think you therefore get better learning for these students, you get exposed to more ideas, and you just enjoy your time at university. Incredibly proud to stand in OO.
Thank you for that speech. Calling Deputy Prime Minister.
Hi, sorry. I'm in the same situation as Shane in the recording speech thing, so I'm just making sure that I get everyone's consent before I record it. Cool. Thanks, guys. I'm going to start by talking about the trigger words and individuals who have gone through bad experiences. Because I think that on either side of the house, if somebody has gone through a tremendously horrific experience, it's likely that they're going to be able to seek support from the university anyway through some sort of university counseling scheme, through medical professionals who are dealing with the issue that they've experienced. I don't know if it's necessary to put forward this scheme in order to deal with these issues, because I think that a lot of the time, the types of issues that people have, while they may be linked to minority status or they may be linked to an event that has happened to you, they're also just general health issues that you have to be able to deal with yourself, and you have to be able to find help for yourself. I think it's likely that you're going to be able to access care and access services in order to deal with these kinds of issues on either side of the house, given that most people, most universities do care about their students to some extent, especially if it's physical harm. So I don't really understand why it is necessary to have this specific form of healthcare or help for these individuals. What I do think is important is the individuals need to be able to practice resilience within the areas that they are. That is to say that oftentimes in the scenarios that opening opposition are talking about, where you are unable to interact with people from the LGBT plus society or the debating society, and you're interacting with your classmates, it is likely that the types of interactions are, first of all, probably not going to be horrific insofar as there is likely going to be a lecturer there. There's likely already things surrounding bullying policies that just you can't bully people generally. And so inflicting some kind of harm upon someone likely isn't something that you're going to be able to do anyway. I think that this is something that heavily mitigates their case, because it's not that your physical safety is likely going to be under threat in these kinds of environments. And outside of those environments, you likely are going to be able to self-select either into friends groups, organizations, or And they say that like in a lot of the universities there aren't things like gay societies. But I think that if that is true, these also aren't the universities that are likely going to implement these policies surrounding like safe spaces and trigger word areas. That is to say that like if you do not allow gay society, or you do not allow like gay people on your campus, then it's unlikely that you're going to implement this policy anyway. So in that case, I just don't think it's comparative. I think it's likely that you are just going to be able to self-select into these spaces. Why then are these spaces likely to be harmful? I think there's a couple of things here. The first is what Shane said in regards to individuals not being able to implement these policies in a way that is going to be beneficial. That is to say that a lot of time the people that universities employ are people who've been employed there for a long time. They likely aren't going to be able to understand your experiences to a very large degree, but also they're likely going to be overwhelmed with individuals seeking their care. That is to say that instead of trying to seek some form of other care, i.e., trying to overcome what it is that you have experienced, for example, if somebody misgenders you, you being able to either correct them yourself, or you being able to like deal with that issue and go and talk to somebody who's your friend, you opt to talk to somebody who likely isn't going to be able to help you anyway. But I think that what's also true is that for a lot of cases, for individuals who seek safe spaces, they're part of minorities or groups that have various different opinions within those minorities. Minorities aren't just a monolith. So, for example, there are individuals who, like, there are people who are feminists who have very different takes on feminism, very different takes on what it is that they believe should be the case. If it is the case that this university is promoting one viewpoint surrounding the idea of what is right and what is wrong surrounding like a safety policy, then it just alienates part of that minority anyway. But what it also does is have a signaling effect to everybody within the university that there is one right way of thinking about how it is that we should interpret like trans ideology. That might be like excluding people who are non-binary, or it might be something along the right lines of like being exclusive to like trans medicalism. We just don't know what it is that they're going to necessarily decide is the right or wrong aspect of that minority, meaning that a large proportion of these people are likely to be left out because the majority of that minority are the ones who are able, who dictate what it is that the language is used around these places. What we think that this means is these safe spaces are, one, likely to dictate what it is that the right or wrong discussion topic around these areas are on university campuses, making it harder for actual rhetoric and discussion to happen, because there seems to be an authority that now these individuals have to buy into in order to be seen as legitimate. This actually disproves their case surrounding the idea of better discussion, because now the university has taken a stance surrounding it rather than allowing individuals to have discussions amongst themselves where they are able to individually put forward their own perspective and try and convince them on the merits of their perspective, rather than having to contend with an authority that is already trying to implement that perspective. We think it's better on our side of the house when you're able to have individuals talking about their needs, and particularly in areas when you have like things like guest speakers coming in, because that's another issue that I think that they try and point out, is the idea of like individuals rejecting kind of like conversations that are happening. On their first point surrounding individuals needing to feel safe in those spaces, I think first of all, there's an option on both sides of the house for you to leave. We've already given you the example of you being able to seek help elsewhere through like through friends or through other forms of healthcare. But I also just think that it is likely that if you say that individuals aren't able to challenge people in a certain way, i.e., there is a disciplinary procedure if you challenge a guest speaker in a specific way, that is likely to lead to resentment, because rather than you actually believing you have some form of ability to question them, there's a point.
Yeah, so often the groups we're talking about are the ones that have the least access to healthcare. But apart from that, even if they do have it, surely it's better to just have more measures in place to support them when these sorts of topics come up.
I know all about having the least access to healthcare, but what I'll say is that like if we were talking about the context of these individuals in a place where a safe space policy is likely to be implemented, then it's also likely that they're to have a counselling services. And what we say is that it is likely that because of what I said about like minorities having an opinion or having differing opinions and like pushing forward the majority of that minority opinion, it's likely that a lot of people are left behind when you try and integrate into those sort of situations. But what we then think is that individuals then feel cut off because now they feel like they can't engage with it. Shane talked about the amount of individuals who are falling into rabbit holes where, because they feel like a right of theirs is being infringed upon, they automatically turn against it, don't engage with it, and learn to vote against it. what they also do is turn against what it is that universities stand for, the type of research that they put out, the recommendations that they put forward, because they see universities as a place that has betrayed them, particularly individuals who have never set foot in one. This is just harmful for society, which has been impacted by change, should be both valued in this debate.
Thank you for that speech. Calling Diallo.
Chen, am I audible before I start?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, great. POIs in the chat, please. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Our case is going to be based upon how does this specific policy in terms of universities will have a wider effect on the whole society as a whole in the political spectrum, with politicians coming into those universities, whether this was about lectures or like basically being guest lecturers, and then how in that process of being in touch with those kind of policies, they get radicalized more specifically. Realize that this will be a more nuanced and analytical extension to what OG tells you when they just say a radicalism is going to happen because people won't like this. We'll give you a more nuanced approach to this, and as well give you the exclusive mechanism as to why this is the tipping point for those politicians who perhaps weren't as radicalized in the beginning, but now are becoming so. So what is then, how does this motion impact those kind of politicians? So realize they come to the universities to talk, and this is a normal practice. So these are politicians are generally people who are lecturers and people who have some sort of experience in the field. They come in to give motivational speeches or they talk about their careers or something like that. And this is a usual practice and it happens all the time. What happens then in terms of on opposition to the world, what happens to them is that nobody either engages with them, meaning, for example, if one of a politician comes in and wants to talk about the migrant problem, migrant issues and migration issues, what they're likely going with, and if they want to have some specific analysis as to what happens in that sort of field, it's likely they're either going to be canceled to some extent, or like basically the lecture is going to be canceled because somebody will deem this as perhaps not as inclusive or something like that, because it will have any sort of opinion on it which is unbiased towards migrants, or it will at least be censored to some extent. They will tell them specifically you cannot say this or this, and realize that this is likely going to be very brushed off before, because university does not have a lot of time to deal with every intricacies with every single one of those politicians that come there and talk about it. And what then happens is that they themselves are likely to become radicalized. This is for a few reasons. One, people don't like them when people, especially those politicians who are used to talking to other people and talking in front of a lot of people, have a bigger ego, and they think that their words are important, and they think that people should hear them, and that's the reason why they're even a guest lecturer in the first place. So they feel like this was an infringement on their own ego, so to say, and they don't simply like it. Second of all, realize that they don't understand the actual reasons as to why they're going to be censored. And this is really important because, one, usually these are people who are different generation, this is like the generational gap, don't understand the specific problems and realities as to why they cannot talk about certain issues, especially if they're not explained to the well extent, but also reality check for the entire debate. This debate doesn't only happen in USA and UK, where people perhaps have a better perception of these sort of things. This also happens in developing countries or Croatia or Eastern Europe or whatever, where you have things such as parallelly and simultaneously universities will have these sort of policies, but then also what's going to happen on a regular daily basis in those sort of countries are femicides or pride flags that are removed from the main square basically a day after they were put out there. So this is the kind of situation which you have to put those policy in and then make it efficient. And then lastly, they're going to also see this as an infringement of freedom of speech, because they feel like this is something deeply personal, because they feel like they're going to be silenced, because they feel like that people are going to be dismissive towards them, that they will tell them that their opinion is less important than some other people's opinion that they do not know, maybe some other students they don't even see as important generally, and they see this as an infringement of their own self-actualization. And this is the tipping point. This is the tipping point as to why this is a better, more, let's say, more efficient way of radicalization, radicalizing those people as to some other, because one, this is a personal experience that you have to go through, and you see it from your first hand, how somebody who is wearing a pride brooch is telling you you cannot say those kinds of things, and realize that they're also likely, because they're so impacted by emotions, and because exactly what O's analysis say, that there's perhaps there was some traumatic experience behind it, they are so complicit, they're so impacted by those emotions, they cannot even express to which extent and why, perhaps what is the reasoning behind not having the ability to talk about those things. They will only see this as a personal attack. But second of all, it is because the freedom of speech specifically is something that is so specific to a person's core identity, because that's the way you portray yourself to others. That is your presentment to other societies and to other people who believe that you're an idol. That's the reason why they, or at least perceive you as some sort of, let's say, as a person who is important, because that's the reason why you were coming there as a speaker in the first place. That is how you radicalize politicians, and that is why this is a specific mechanism as to one OG said, but generally what happens in those sort of countries, because this is a direct response from OO's response to our POI. What is then the consequence of all of this? Radicalization of the political spectrum and trickle down to the rest of the society, because at that point in time, the person takes the moral high ground. They explain to the voters, for example, but realize that this explanation what happens and why they were being silenced, but realize that this is likely going to be one, a scapegoat, and two, they don't explain the intricacies, neither because they don't understand it or because it's simply too hard to explain, even if we take opposition at their best and say that they can be able to understand it. And this creates a polarization of the general society, because people will believe this. People who generally have this sort of tendencies in their values will see this as a confirmation bias, but also it's really important that this specifically happens in universities. There will be things, people saying like, you can get a diploma without being brainwashed into liberal agenda, and that's how political radicalization is going to happen. Before moving on, yeah, opening, I'll take you.
Talks of controversial speakers are more likely to go ahead when you have safety measures in place. It's when these measures aren't there to make the talk safe that the alternative is probably that the talks are just not held at all, since universities are still left-wing on both sides.
No, exactly the safety measures, it look like you cannot say a specific thing, or you cannot say basically maybe a specific explanation or specific analysis. And that's the problem. That's basically the core and the crux of our case. Why is this extension debate winning? In terms of OG, I believe that whole case is self-mitigatory, because discourse is likely not going to happen either way, because as O did point out, that some other opposition could point out, you're likely to talk about those most intimate group things that are maybe the most important for you to, in terms of discourse, to only your close friend groups. I don't understand why I'll talk to a stranger about all of these things. But also, if it's done in a bad way, then if it's done in a bad way, then it's not clear how efficient those trigger warnings are. But also realize, when they talk about resilience, our case is logically prior to this, because we're the side that shows you why society won't be accepting to what universities are doing. And our case is logically prior to that extension. But realize that their whole case is premised on safe spaces that will be done well, which is the PR mech that we heard in the first speech, which I told you why there's not going to be accountability towards those things. But also, our extension has more magnitude, because maybe they help those minorities in universities, but we're the one that create a better safe space for those outside, because we don't polarize the whole society. For all these reasons, I think CG is clear.
Thank you for that speech. Calling member of opposition.
Hi, just give me 1 minute. Can everybody hear me if I speak like this?
Yep, loud and clear.
Thank you. I guess the same trigger warnings that applied to previous speeches apply to mine as well. And I guess if I could just get confirmation from both gov teams that they'll be fine US being recorded.
Sorry, what? I didn't hear you.
Sorry, I was just saying, if I could also get consent like previous speakers from both gov teams that they're okay with US being recorded. Okay, OG is fine.
Yeah.
Fine, thanks.
I'll take QAs in chat. Three things in this speech. First, responses to closing government. Secondly, a unique extension proving why we reduce harassment and improve student safety, going beyond the mechanisms of opening opposition and proving why even in the most serious cases of harassment, hate crimes, and sexual assault, why we have more effective mechanisms to target those. Thirdly, on why we get better communities and safe spaces. Opening opposition is able to prove that you get safe spaces. We will fill the gap in their case and prove why these will do good safe spaces that will be student-led and cater to their needs. First, responses to closing government. I just think this extension is really a stretch, guys. Come on. You think a politician that comes to a university and has one negative experience with students boycotting and protesting against him is going to be the tipping point that makes this person a radical? This is crazy. First, the reason that they've been invited onto university is because they already have strong fixed beliefs based on years of political participation, based on the parties that they've been a part of. So it's unclear why one negative experience at a university is going to change this. Secondly, we will point out that these people, politicians are self-interested and take on various political stances for selfish reasons all the time, even if that's not what they genuinely believe. So it's not a matter of their ego being hurt. It's more likely that they're just responding to what they think the electorate believes. And they know that students are not representative of the general electorate. Therefore, this experience doesn't affect them. Thirdly, even if personal experiences do affect politicians, they have millions of personal experiences that are more significant than going to a university and speaking. They interact with the media, they interact with opposition politicians, they run for election. Surely these will be the core experiences that shape their ego rather than going to some random university. Second, we flip this beyond, I think the OOPUI here is pretty good as well. But I think the other harm that we need to point to here is if you don't have safe spaces that minority students feel like they can go to, that run parallel to these kinds of events, such as inviting Kathleen Stock to the Oxford Union, what do you think they're going to do? Especially those that are more strong-willed. We believe that these students are likely to riot and protest against these speakers. What is the harm of this? If you buy the closing government extension, surely this is an even worse thing, because now radical politicians can weaponize the fact that, look, these students are being liberally indoctrinated by universities. They are rioting and protesting against free speech, and this feeds into narratives of extremism. First extension, why do we reduce harassment and improve student welfare and safety? We think that campus safety is, for many reasons, as previously illustrated, a significant issue in this debate. First, because university staff and police are not omniscient. In many cases, abuses happen behind closed doors, and harassment, the perpetuation of hate crimes, often happens in places where there are no witnesses to be able to see it, which is why self-reporting is necessary. Secondly, universities in general are just very volatile and dangerous spaces. These are young adults who are, for the first time in their lives, living without adult supervision, around dangerous substances, interacting frequently with one another. So there's lots of scope for abuse to happen. Thirdly, the attitudes of young university students make them particularly vulnerable to abuse. These are young people who are being thrust into a new and diverse environment that are desperate to fit in, which is why fraternities and sororities and their hierarchies and leadership are able to tempt them into cruel instances of hazing that undermine the dignity of these students. Why then does not promoting a culture of safety, even if it only applies to things like safe spaces and trigger words, which governments might suggest most people consider to be trivial, why is it that not applying the standards of safety to those more trivial things hurts safety in all areas? Firstly, even if it seems trivial, these are things that contribute to a culture of normalizing the more serious abuses that happen. Jokes about sexual assault, it is unclear whether or not they contribute to specific instances of assault itself. But the culture that you normalize is what allows students to believe that if they do these kinds of acts, that there will be no repercussions from university. But second, we are willing to concede that government might try to say, look, we recognize that even without safetyism, we can still have serious and strict policies on things like assault, on things like genuine hate crimes that include physical violence. The problem is, as I pointed out in my characterization, in many cases, you rely on student self-reporting. So what matters is not whether you have good guidelines or policies regarding assault and hate crimes. It's about what students believe. Why do we think without a culture of safetyism, students' beliefs are against the university? First, they believe that if the university is not taking the trivial seriously, that they will be more dismissive even of the more serious complaints. That they'll simply say that you're making stories up, that you don't remember what happened, as many university administrators have consistently done in the past. Secondly, this debate is about opposing an existing norm. It's about getting rid of existing safe spaces. It is about eliminating existing lists of trigger words. So when the university is actively taking steps towards making the space more conservative and less welcoming of minorities, as a minority student, you would naturally assume that if you go to them with a complaint, that they would not be active and vigilant in investigating it. Thirdly, this feeds into narratives and stereotypes that students themselves might have about how the university functions. The fact that there's a massive generational gap between university faculty and staff might point to the fact that they don't take your complaints seriously, that they have very geriatric attitudes regarding the seriousness of things like verbal hate crimes, even though they deeply undermine the dignity of students. Fourthly and finally, even if some students believe that some elements of the faculty will be accepting, they are also tended to believe that there is some kind of conservative wing within the faculty, the kinds of people who are pushing against safe spaces and trigger words that will oppose doing things like accusing your star athlete of assault or harassment because they want to preserve the reputation of the university. What is the comparative and why is there greater university safety on our side? 3 reasons. First, we have more self-reporting. When students believe that universities are going the extra step of promoting a culture of safety, even for things that might appear to be trivial like trigger words and might very well be accepted outside of university, that is when students have absolute assurance that their complaints will be taken seriously. So they are more willing to self-report on our side of the house. They are more willing to go forward with investigations and university disciplinary procedures, which ensures that you have a deterrent against future abusers, which ensures that fraternities and sororities have an incentive to change their own culture. Secondly, universities themselves can be held to the standard that they have publicized. If you put in your pamphlets, if you put in your committee reports that you care very seriously, even about trivial cases of discrimination, when something serious comes to you, students can use this against you, call you out for your hypocrisy. Second extension, why do we have better safe spaces on our side of the house? Opening opposition proves that safe spaces exist, but never prove why these safe spaces will be good. Why do we think they will be good? We concede with opening government's characterization that these will be run by administrators to begin with. But we think that in the long term, students are likely to take control of safe spaces in meaningful ways for 2 reasons. First, because being seen by the university and the university itself taking the first step is essential. Students, even if they really wanted to create an African-American society or a minority society, probably wouldn't do this of their own initiative because they don't want to shield themselves against accusations of discrimination and racism from other majority students. When the university has validated the fact that this kind of community should exist in the first place, that is when students are more likely to take a proactive role within it because they're able to start societies based off of that, which is why you have curriculum courses in universities which are specifically about minorities and their struggles and experiences. So it is in this way that in the long term that you get a transfer of these safe spaces from administration control to student control. When you get better student services, targeted counseling from students that have similar experiences for those reasons, closing opposition.
Thank you for that speech. A reminder, POIs are highly encouraged. With that being said, closing Kafir.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Okay. I would like to take POI from opening. Somewhere around 5:30. If I forget to take one by 5:45, you can just unmute yourself. Otherwise, like chat or whatever. Don't really have preference. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Come on, guys, this is unrealistic, is not response. On CO, they attack one of our mechs, we have 3 more mechs. But to bring back this mech, yes, politicians being called out during their attendance in class and in these universities is problematic because firstly, these are their formative years. Generally, as an adult, it's the first time they can vote and all these things. Secondly, it's probably the start of their career in youth campaigns, in youth political wings, and all these things. And thirdly, people just idealize the youth, so they focus on these things as well. So insofar you have right-wing politicians that still attend MIT and Harvard and get suppressed in this sort of way or feel suppressed or whatever, they are more likely to radicalize this still state. They say, but then you still have rebellions on your side, and then this is flipped. This is symmetrical because these speakers will still speak on both sides of the house. It's regardless will they speak on campus or not. So people rebel regardless of this. That's not our mech. This misses our mechanism. Secondly, I think our mechanism explain why a top-down approach creates more backlash and all these things. Then it says, you need to normalize serious things and all these things. This misses the framing that most of these people still on campus are normal, and if you make bad sex assault jokes, you're still likely to get out, not to get called out. Then we can flip their argument because note, insofar your friend just calls you out for your bad sex assault joke, you're more likely to believe them if there's not also a parallel thing, a parallel top-down university policy. Because insofar there isn't a university policy, you believe this is your friend's opinion calling you out on doing bad bullshit, you're more likely to believe that they're just mindlessly echoing university policy insofar there is a university policy and all these things. I don't think that they prove the tipping point that these things don't get called out in their world, thus they have no case on OO. I think generally desensitization is something that insofar these people are still likely to be, most of these people are still likely to be normal. I think desensitization is probably the way to go for these people. Why? No, the likely way, I explain this in the POI, but I say that like a fucking idiot. This is the real the thing that I want to say. Most likely things that are going to happen is that them presenting non-binary people are going to be, people are going to call them out and using she, her pronouns and not they, them pronouns, which yes, it's bad, but it's going to happen in the world. Insofar this is true, you need to know, you just need to learn to adjust that this probably doesn't adjust your identity, that you can still be a non-binary, film presenting non-binary person, regardless of people miscalling you out and all these things. So this is probably the way that you want to go. OO's principle is contingent on the practical. They say sometimes for productive speech, you want to have the limitations of free speech. Thus, you have to have productive speech so you can have free speech. If we prove that this is productive, and I think we can prove insofar people don't get desensitized, this is something that's better on our side of the house. I want to say, I think that the point on, I think that the point on more likely for you being to speak up is something that doesn't happen on their side of the house. Why? Because no, you can still listen to people experience to the internet through friends, regardless of this. No, this is just 3 years. I'm not sure why this is a clear period for you to open up towards non-binary people. You can have most of your life for this. On some framing to also push out OO, because no, they have to prove that it's going to be done in a good way. I'll prove frame. OG has some framing. They say they don't have the time and all these things, and they're disconnected. I have 3 points as to why this will be done in a bad way. Look, general progressive issues are a broad umbrella. You have probably some that happen more often, such as misogyny, and some that happen less often, such as non-binary issues. Just because there's more women than non-binary people, the scale, if you do something, you probably want to protect these people. This maybe sounds horrible, but literally the way we want to do. The reason why you're likely to target the wrong things as an academia, especially in developing countries when you still have really big problems with misogyny, but you want to talk about non-binary issues, is threefold. Firstly, in academia, you have political consensus. Everybody knows that femicide is bad. Everybody knows what misogyny looks like, so you don't talk about misogyny. Secondly, there's class. Femicide and misogyny happens down the line. It happens more in lower class neighborhoods, lower class societies. You're not exposed to this. You don't think about this, so you perceive that these issues as being solved. Thirdly, you just have the internet. I can look at all of the progressive speeches and all the progressive think tanks in America, even though we aren't even close to solving these issues in Europe and all these things. You're very likely to miss the mark when you try to make these policies and make these and make the social these safe spaces bad in the first place. This is very important because this is prerequisite for all of their case to work. Maybe this case works in UCLA and California and all these things, but this not only proves that this is likely to be done bad in most of ways, but this framing is also proves to you why academia in the Balkan is also likely to push these policies, because they are in academia and they are echoed. They are in a bubble and they don't think about the real problems in Balkan. This is literally what happens in Croatia. This happened at my universities. People got pissed off and thought that these people are uniquely disconnected, which they probably are. You want to address this in a different sort of way. They are unlikely to do this. And now to reiterate Lara's mechanisms and why are they. Before that, I'll take opening.
The CG case is very high burden compared to ours, which just tells you that giving people more support services when horrible things happen improves people's lives. And CO fills a hole already covered.
Sorry, I gave three framing. So I give you 3 reasons why you do this badly. If you do this badly, this doesn't happen on your side of the house, already one response. And I literally opened up my speech with this. You can't just say this is high burden, this is bullshit, and you have to have responses. 3 more mechanisms that, irregardless of the political one that Lara talked about, why it is palatable on our side of the house. Firstly, other politicians can use the moral high ground, saying, they're restricting freedom of speech and all these things. This is palatable to the average Joe, thus are very likely to create political capital for them from the average Joe. Secondly, discourse is palatable. Insofar you have a political party that doesn't want to enter into discourse, you're more likely to think that they're just in the wrong as an average guy that's not ideologically predispositioned. Thirdly, this is top down. A lot of people are alienated from universities because most people don't go to universities, right? Insofar this is true. People think that these people are just disconnected, and I prove why they are. So you probably don't like these sort of things and tend towards the right, who says that this is bullshit and all these things. I think that we also prove that most of the right-wing politicians attend these universities and their society gets litigated for malpractice for 3 years. They get radicalized, which is also a direct link. Not only do we explain to you that you create political capital on the right wing, but only that the right-wing politicians that get into power that are probably ones that attend Harvard and MIT. These are the ones who are going to get into the side of the Republican Party and become Vivek Ramaswamy. OG says you want to have discourse, but then they say people live in societies and don't talk. So I'm not sure that what they did. First point is comparative. On their second point, we gave 4 more mechanisms. They give 1, so I think we can win this.
Thank you for that speech. Calling Opfer.
Cool. Can I be seen and heard clearly?
Yes to both.
I just want to start this speech by pointing out that in CG's attempt to try and take out OO, they've had absolutely zero response to any of the CO extension on why we are literally able to prevent sexual assault on campuses in the here and now. If they care about misogyny and class dynamics, you should care about the poor women who continuously get sexually assaulted on campuses, which is why you should care about our extension on preventing literal assault. In CG's absolute best case, there is some long-term harm of radicalization. There is nothing to talk about the literal current harm that we see on a daily basis of assault and hazing on campuses that only our side is fundamentally able to solve. It is for this reason that the lack of prioritization of our case in the 4 cases in this debate is fundamentally damning, because it is only CO that has told you about a literal harm right now that is happening to people on the ground that you need to fix. The second thing I want to talk about is just academics. And I really think CG undermines how academics work. I've been in academia both in the global south and in the global north. Academics in the global south aren't really as myopic as they may want to claim. Yes, they are very progressive, but they recognize the type of society they live in. So in Sri Lanka, yes, you don't have LGBT centers on uni campuses, but you do have separate women's centers on uni campuses. In Mexico, yes, you don't have things for transgender people, but you do have specific sections for people who are queer or for women in these campuses. So yes, you are able to tailor this to your cultural response. This is just fundamentally unrealistic coming from CG. 2 clashes and then weighing. Firstly, as to why this helps minorities. Let's just quickly take out CG's entire claim on backlash, right? I think Chanidu's 3 responses on how this is not the tipping point and how politicians are self-interested and how their other personal experiences deals with this, but fundamentally realize that they've not responded to our flip of this claim, which is that you are more likely to engage in the bad types of cancellation they want without safe spaces. Because on our side, you can engage with these speakers with some sort of support. On their side, there is no engagement because you feel like you have to riot. So CG doesn't get any of their claims on radicalization because it depends on cancellation happening in the first place, which is more likely on their side of the house. Second, if their problem then is about conversations, we are better able to have conversations. But even if not, we care about this much less. Their harm is a potential harm. Our harm is a literal harm. They have done nothing to prove why, even if these people are radicalized, it necessarily means you're going to have backlash against these communities, particularly in a world in which legal protections for these people are becoming stronger, and in a world where you raise people in institutions that prioritize these people's rights, why they are not going to become better people later on in the world and help other people who are queer. I want to note that this is an opposers motion. It's not likely to happen the way that they've talked about in conservative societies. It's much more likely to happen in the way I've described it, because even if you're in academia, you recognize you are representing an institution in the developing world. Let's just bring back all of Chanidu's analysis on reducing harassment and improving safety. They have done absolutely nothing to respond to Chanidu's mechanizations of how admin and staff are not omniscient. And so you need self-reporting to prevent things like assault, on how universities are volatile and dangerous, and therefore you can normalize bad culture, on how attitudes lead to people being vulnerable to things like hazing, which means that their side contributes to normalizing things like sexual assault. Their side relies on self-reporting, which you're unlikely to get because you believe the uni will be dismissive, because you see the university now actively taking away protections it had previously, because the generational gap you have with campus, because of the reputation universities want to keep. All of this fundamentally means that because they focus on OO instead of us, there is no response to literally stopping the people that they are harming. CG responds to this by saying, you're going to be called out, but now you're much less likely to call these people out if you recognize that the university you're in is taking away protections from you and giving protections to the people who are the ones hurting you. Let's fundamentally weigh this physical harm idea versus the ideas of free speech that have come out throughout this debate. I don't care about free speech if it means that these people are literally being harmed, literally being assaulted. These are people who have undergone historical oppression. These are people who are currently more vulnerable. And note crucially, if we're able to allow these people better chances to live in a society, live in a university, they are much more likely to do well academically in a university, meaning they're able to achieve greater social mobility, which is exactly how you can prevent themselves from facing assault in the future if you are more rich and better able to protect yourself. So not only does our side stop assault right now, it also perpetually stops assault in the future because we give these people the tools to be able to, and also because of self-reporting. I'll take that point from CG.
Right. We tell you that your progressive friends will call you out on being sexist. Thus, you're more likely to believe them. If there's no top-down enforcement on this, you didn't prove the exact opposite of this.
I go to a university that prioritizes free speech. I've constantly been called a faggot in front of my friends, and no one has been able to call it out because university does absolutely nothing. That is a world in which you do not have these protections. That is why you need these protections. Second, this improves university safe spaces and the lives of minorities outside the university. Look, OGs claim on these sorts of questioning and probative questioning as to a person's identity. We think that kind of questioning is bad. We think the type of questioning you can get is much better when you have these safe spaces for people to be able to go to and ask those questions well. Second, the performative activism that OG talks about is actually good. This is where we take over our opening half, because our opening half doesn't respond to the OG claim on performative activism. The reason why even performative activism is good is because you now have a precedent from the university you can use for accountability. If the university has said in its pamphlets, like Chanidu has said, that we quote unquote support you, then when they don't support you, when you have been assaulted, that is literally something you can use to hold them accountable. This is why it's important. The government side of this debate talks about the quote-unquote real world. Having access to good, safe spaces is what gives you the tool to be able to deal with this so that you can have a better life in the real world. If you do not do this, these people will never have better run lives. Chanidu's analysis on why you get student-run safe spaces and can get changed from admin has absolutely zero response from CG, which is why we are still winning, which allows us to do things like analyze class, because poorer students can also access these safe spaces. But last, I want to know that we change the onus, because on every government side, you are putting the pressure on the person who is the victim of sexual assault or the victim of a hate crime, to remove themselves from a situation. If someone has a peanut allergy, it is not their responsibility to constantly ensure that they are safe. It is the responsibility of the people around them to not consume peanuts in front of them. It's not enough to just say, it's going to happen anyway. University is what changes people's behavior, and we have a responsibility to ensure that we protect these people, because they are absolutely no choice in being a victim of sexual assault. They have absolutely no choice in being born a queer person. The importance of this is simple. Misgendering, trigger words, jokes about assault are really, really, really bad. And having good university safe spaces means, as a society, generally, we are also able to prevent this. We take over OG because we think OO sufficiently takes them down. We take over OO because we go beyond just speech and talk about physical, literal safety, which is more important. And we take over CG because we think their case isn't proven well enough and it's too high burden for them to be able to win. It is for this reason that we prevent literal harm to students in the right now and perpetually into the future. That is why you will vote CO.
Thank you for that speech. With that, we come to the end of this debate. I request all of the speakers to leave this room so that the panel can deliberate. Thank you.